you're not a cannibalist crazy man eating babies. You're probably doing some stuff I wouldn't agree with, but I get it. Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's Scott Groves with the On the Edge podcast. This is like a big treat for me. If you're watching the YouTube, you will see this book right here, The Ranch, which I got this as a recommendation because I read all kinds of weird post-apocalyptic military dramas. I basically call them soap operas for men. But I came across this book and I was like, 2/3 of the way through the first of 7 books called The Ranch, the Jack Sterling Legacy series. And I was like, all right, I got to see if I can find this author. So I emailed my new friend, Sean Liscom, and I was like, hey, is there any chance, like, you're like a big deal now, you've written these 7 books, is there any chance you would carve out time to come on this podcast? She's like, yeah, nobody really asked me for that stuff. Let's see if we can make it work with my publisher. And here we are. I know you had to drive to like your daughter's house or something because you really do, like in the book, The Ranch, live out in the middle of nowhere. And you're like, the Wi-Fi ain't so good here.
We run off a satellite internet, and there's days it ain't the greatest.
Yeah.
But yeah, we live... It was an hour and a half drive into my daughter's place.
Oh my goodness. So this is why I'm waiting for Elon Musk to perfect Starlink, because as soon as you can get like reliable high-speed internet from anywhere, I'm out. I will not live in a city ever again. But the internet, because I do so much live streaming, is kind of it's a necessity for me and my business. But you can just drive to your daughter's house, I guess.
Yeah. Came into civilization today.
All right, so the interesting thing is I'm on book 3 of the Jack Sterling Legacy series, and there's a big sea change at the end of book 2, beginning of book 3. So unfortunately, all of our discussion has to revolve around book 1 or 2, or we're just going to spoil so much. So let me give people the background real quick. Basically, there's this character who's kind of just like your everyman, Jason Sterling. He works at effectively an Amazon supply chain type warehouse, and one day he finds out that his estranged father dies. Turns out his estranged father was in the CIA and also had come into some money, so set up this ranch for his 2 grown sons and just said, hey, sends his lawyer over because he's dead, and he says, hey, I know I wasn't a great father, but I left this legacy thing for you, this ranch that's pretty much self-sustaining. Check it out. I'd love to leave it to you. And just in case the end of the world ever comes, this ranch is here as like a retreat site. Sure enough, year later, end of the world comes and all hell breaks loose, and that's pretty much the first couple chapters of the book, The Ranch. So I have to ask, your background, Sean, are you an ex-Navy SEAL, CIA guy? Did you work in the government? Like, where does your fascination come from with all these like tactics and end of the world type stuff?
I have a lot of friends that are military. I was never in. I never served in that capacity. I was in the fire service for 23 years.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, I did a lot of wildland firefighting and then a lot of volunteering with that. But just growing up around the Type A personalities, it made a difference, I guess.
I feel like when I read a book by Jack Carr, obviously he was a Navy SEAL weapons specialist, so like all of his detail about weapons is like just a little over the top. Like I don't need to know whether it was the P365 XL or the P365 macro. But what's interesting is because you have that background in kind of emergency responder, first responders, your detail when it comes to the injuries that are sustained from the fights in the book is way more interesting than other writers who I've come across. And it actually supports the story more than like because a handgun's kind of a handgun, but how you injure your leg will actually affect whether you can walk for the rest of your life. So does that come from your experience in the fire service?
It does. I mean, a lot of those injuries I've seen, firsthand. So it does play a big part.
Okay, so we have to talk about injuries because this all fascinates me. What's the injury that you've seen that looked the most devastating? And you're like, it's kind of superficial or go away. And then what's like the worst injury you've ever seen that didn't result in death?
I think the craziest thing I ever saw is we went on a wreck one night. And here's this car sitting in the middle of the highway, little Honda car. Whole front of the car is torn off. I mean, from the firewall forward is gone. And there's nothing else around. We couldn't figure out what the guy hit. There's a bunch of bystanders there. We get out, go running up there with our gear, and we're looking for the driver. And here's this guy standing off the side of the road saying, I was the one driving. It didn't have a scratch on him. Like, what? You hit? Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I figured we needed a body bag, not a medical bag. And he says, well, I hit that semi over there in the lake bed. Wait, what? you know, he had turned around on the highway and hit a semi truck head on. He walked away, and the semi truck driver went through the median, through the northbound lanes, out into the lake bed, and rolled his truck. And he had a broken leg.
Oh
And
man.
could not believe this guy wasn't injured. Of course, he did get a ride with NHP, down to the sheriff's office. But
Yeah, to check the blood alcohol level.
yeah, he was a little over the top.
Yeah.
Um,
It's never fair that the drunk driver survives because they're so out of it. Their body is relaxed and they don't tense
Yeah.
up and have the same concussive force of like the poor person they hit. It's like
Yeah.
more times than not, and you've probably seen this firsthand. It's like it's the guy that was doing the wrong thing who makes it through the crash.
yeah, just walks away.
Oh,
And I think this one unfortunately did end up in death. But I think the craziest thing I ever saw is we had a paraglider. The guys that fly around on the parachutes on the wing currents, and he was tandem with another guy, and they crashed. Basically, is what they did into the hillside. The guy in front of him wasn't hurt when we got there. They were still strapped together, and the guy, the experienced guy, was riding in the back, and he was talking to us when we got there. And my partner was trying to get a pulse, trying to get vitals on him, and there weren't any. They were so low that we could not get them, and he ended up passing away right there on the hillside.
oh,
But he was talking to us, I mean, coherently, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. He was gone.
yeah. Internal injuries are real, right? Like the internal bleeding and all of that kind of craziness.
Yeah, it was nuts.
Did that maybe that informed the hillside rescue in your first book, where Jill and Jason find the hikers on the side of the hill? Sounds
Kind of familiar, yeah.
yeah. There you go. So tell me, like, okay, so you're in the fire services, and I have a lot of friends that are firemen down in LA County, and what's the most polite way to say this? They don't strike me as the most well-read people that are going to have a second career in in the literary arena. So what makes you different that you went from fire services, first responder, kind of alpha male, I'm guessing, to like, you know what? I'm going to pick up a pen and paper and write some books for a living.
I had dabbled in writing since high school, and it never anything really serious, and then life happens. And back in 2016, I actually said to myself, I need to write this story that I've got in my head. So I sat down and wrote it. And I never figured it would go anywhere. In fact, I was halfway through writing it when a buddy of mine who was reading what I was writing, he says, you got to publish this on Amazon. What do you mean? And I had read lots of books, lots of Kindle books, and it never clicked to me that these were self-published books.
Oh, interesting.
So I had never put two and two together. So I started looking at it, and I'm like, I can do this. It might be fun. And so I did the first one, and the next thing I know, I'm getting emails and instant messages, and hey, when's the second book coming out? Oh, a second book? Okay, I guess I should probably start writing again. And I just kind of went from there. It was never meant to be published. It was never meant to be put out there. I was just going to print a few copies off, give it to family and friends, and say, there you go.
Wow. So
yeah,
so clearly, if you only started with one book in mind and now you're at book 7, you didn't have an overarching, Harry Potter, Star Wars world created in your mind where you're like, oh, this is one little character in this huge ecosystem, and eventually I'll flush this out to 10 books. You were just like, let me write this book because I got this cool story, and now you've kind of had to add on to the train of thought.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't use an outline. I don't use notes. It's just strictly from what comes into my head when I sit down and start writing. And it's just crazy. I mean, I can't believe that it has gone this far. And then as I was beginning to write book 3 when I was contacted by a small publisher, Creative Text. And at first I thought it was a scam.
Right.
And I've been getting all these emails and texts from for the low price of $3,000, we can publish your book.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute, I'm already doing that.
Yeah. I don't need you to publish my book. Amazon lets me just click publish.
Exactly. And it just blossomed from there. And my publisher Dan, he's an awesome dude, and I told him straight up, I don't do well with deadlines. If I'm going to write, I'm going to write it, and that's all I want to do. And that's what he told me. He says, if you want to write a book a year, write a book a year. If you want to write one book every 10 years, write one book every 10 years. We'll work with that.
So when did book one come out? So you self-published this on Amazon. It came out in when was it?
Yeah, I self-published. The first revision was September 2nd of 2017.
So you've written more than one book a year since this came out.
I don't know how, but yeah.
Oh, so tell me a little bit about how that has changed, right? Because like the first book, you're just writing for yourself, your friends, you probably don't really care about it. But now, I mean, you care about it, but you're not that concerned about the finished product. But now it's like you have an audience and you have a fan base and you have people that care about these characters, and you're writing at a prolific pace of, more than one a year. How has the writing process changed, or has it? You just had this much story to tell about Jason Sterling.
It hasn't. For me, it hasn't. I write for a living now, but I still write for myself. I write a story that I want to hear, and it seems to be that the fans want to hear it too. And I do most of my writing late at night, usually after 9-10 o'clock at night, and it really hasn't changed for me. I just do what I enjoy doing.
And how weird is that for you to say out loud, I now write for a living?
That's almost as weird as saying fans. I when I put that first book out there and I saw that it sold, like 10 copies, I'm like, okay, I know 10 people. And then it was 25 copies. I'm like, wait a minute. Well, I might know 25 people. And then when it hit 100, it's like, who is buying this?
Mm-hmm.
It's like people that I don't know are reading my book. I still can't wrap my head around that.
And just for reference, like, do you have any idea how many people have read the books or how many copies total of the books you've sold?
I haven't even thought to ask. I know it's quite a few.
Yeah.
But, and it's doing really, really, really well. And I never ask how many it's sold, or I just run with it.
Do you read the reviews?
Yes, I do. I don't. Every author loves to get that 5-star review, the
right,
glowing. This is all flowery and this is awesome. But I really, really appreciate those because they took the time. It's the 1-star reviews. When they take the time to write a review. I gotta ask myself sometimes if they actually read the book that I wrote.
Right.
If they're maybe confusing me with somebody else, or if they didn't, maybe they just took everything out of context. It doesn't, I don't put a lot of stock in those.
Right.
I just, it is what it is. It's not everybody's cup of tea. So,
yeah, I mean, no offense to anybody leaving a 1-star review, but you're an idiot. Because one, you can kind of tell by the cover of the book what you're getting, right? Nobody's picking this up expecting to read Eat, Pray, Love of some, woman's journey through self-exploration. You kind of know what you're getting with the book when you pick it up. And then, if you're more than a chapter through it, you're like, oh, I get the vibe. I like this. This is my cup of tea. Who gets to the end of one of your books and was like, that was not at all what I was expecting. I hated it. It was written horribly. I'm going to waste my time leaving a 1-star review. Grow up, people. Come on. I mean, you're not hiding it, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And, when I get those scathing 1-star reviews, this guy should never be a writer. And all I can think of myself is I make a living doing this, and you go back to a job that you hate every day. I mean, that's my self-consolation,
That's totally fair. So you write, man, this is like, you and I couldn't be more polar opposite. Like, all of my energy happens in the morning. If I could magically become a, write for a living, which I love that term. If I could write for a living, it would have to be like, wake up, jujitsu, take the kids to school, immediately start writing at 8:30 in the morning, because like I'm out of juice by like midday. So how does creativity start for you at 9 p.m.?
That actually goes back to when I was writing book 1. I was still working a 9-to-5 job, and so the only time I could find to write was at night or on the weekends. And then I was about halfway through writing that first book when my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. So after, working a 50-hour week plus taking care of the kids, taking care of the house, taking care of the wife, the only time I had left was at night. And I've tried writing during the day. Sometimes I can pull it off, sometimes I can't, but generally at night is when I can self-center and go with it. Um, you know, I do know writers that treat it like a business, and I completely understand that the way of doing things. They're up at 6 o'clock in the morning. By 8 o'clock, they're writing. They'll put in 6 or 8 hours and then, go on about their day. It has never worked for me.
So not knowing anything about your personal life, if this is off limits, just tell me to shut up. That's totally fine. I'm used to it. Is your wife doing okay? Has she recovered?
Oh, yeah. She beat cancer. She went
Awesome.
through all the surgeries, did the chemo, all of that, and fully recovered. So, we thank God every day for that. And,
that's awesome.
But here we are, just living life.
I love it. And speaking of your life, whether it's your kids or your work or the person you aspire to be or whatnot, I kind of think about, the ranch is like the wireframe of the story, right? So like the ranch is kind of where everything revolves and they resupply and the love interests happen and all that stuff. How much of either the ranch or the character Jason Sterling or the character who we find out in the first book is deceased, Jack Sterling, the father, how much of that is autobiographical or aspirational to you or based off of some old timer who you knew who lived up in the mountains? Like I feel like all stories come from somewhere, right? Like all jokes. I have a few friends that are professional comedians. All jokes come, it started from something that really happened, or it starts from some deep-seated pain. That's why most comedians are also, in some type of therapy or doing self-care therapy with drugs or something. Like there's something deep-seated where they're like, oh yeah, this really comes from this guy. So how much of the story or the character or the location setting of the ranch comes from you or your life or something you aspire to be or someone you know?
Well, the location of the ranch was actually based around Elko, Nevada, and back in the day, I used to do a lot of wildland fires out there. So I got to be really, really familiar with the area, and I really love that area. It's gorgeous country. So that's kind of where I picked the setting, somewhere I was familiar with.
Right.
And then like the characters, they're kind of mixes of they're a hodgepodge of different people that I've known in my life. The Jack Sterling is based on a boss that I used to have, and great guy, but you didn't want to cross him.
Fair.
And you always had to kind of watch your back. So, because he would volunteer you for stuff you didn't want to be volunteered for.
There you go. Sounds like you were in the military.
Almost.
Hey, and where does Jason come from? You mentioned you have a daughter. Do you have a son?
I don't have any sons.
Okay.
All daughters. 4 girls. So
4 girls. Woo.
Yeah.
You were overruled in your house at all times.
Never had a chance, man. So I do have one daughter that just got out of the military. She just retired. So
is she Jill?
Is she chill? Yeah, she's chill.
She's Jill. Yeah. For those of you that haven't read the book series yet, everybody will fall in love with Jill. She's a badass, and she looks good in Lululemon spandex, and she's just like this perfect woman character. So okay, cool. So your military daughter is Jill.
Yeah, there's a lot of the same attitude there. And you kind of combine, once you get into the later books, you kind of combine some of that with my wife. So
amazing. Yeah. Amazing. So where does Jason come from?
He's, like I said, he's kind of a hodgepodge. Bosses that I've had, good bosses that I've had, and just stand-up people that I've known, throughout my life.
Yeah. And so, I find I was in the military. I was in from 97 to 2000 before 9/11 and the shit hit the fan. So I never got shot at in anger, nor did I shoot at somebody in anger, but we did a lot of training. I was an infantry guy, and I find that the writing is again, very good and detailed enough to get the point across, but I don't need to know every target model and weapon model and whatnot. So where does all of that knowledge come from? Because obviously you have the first responder stuff, the emergency supplies, the injury. It all made sense to me once I read your biography. I'm like, oh, that's why this stuff, it just sounds so realistic. But where does the weapons training, the tactics, the warfare, where does all of that knowledge within you come from? Because like you said, you didn't serve yourself in that capacity, but it feels realistic enough that if you told me, yeah, I did my 8 years and got out, I wouldn't be surprised.
I've always liked playing with the pew-pews. You know, and I've got a few, and we take them out, we shoot them, and we have fun with them. But whenever I run into something that I don't know or don't quite have a clear understanding of, I have friends that I can give a call on and say, hey, is this how this works? And like tactics and stuff. I think that tactical mentality comes back from fighting wildland fires and structure fires and things like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was that like growing up, being a firefighter in the middle of Nevada?
It was days of sheer boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer terror.
Really?
There was a lot of exciting moments in there. It was so much fun though. I mean, you meet people, you become a brotherhood, just like the military. You got each other's backs, and that's what you rely on.
What does that do to your psyche when you're like, well, yeah, I'm sitting around, maybe I'm working out, maybe I'm cooking dinner with the guys, but at any moment we could respond to like the most horrific moment of somebody's life, right? Car accident, injury, fire at their house, wildfire burning down somebody's house. Like, I kind of think of a lot of people I know from the military that did serve during wartime. They have very much that gallows humor, right? Because they're like, yeah, we're going to sit around and we're going to do training and we're going to have a little bit of a frat house feel for a while. Oh, but then when it's time to go, somebody's going to die. And it's like, well, that's a very weird life to live in. Same with you. It's like, you're kind of having this frat party at the firehouse and cooking and hanging out and lifting weights. And then it's like, oh, but in a moment's notice, we might have to respond to the absolute worst thing that anybody has ever experienced in their entire life.
Yeah. And there's no two calls that are the same. Everything it's always different. And it's like you said, you're going to somebody's house they are having the worst moment of their life at that time. And, you develop a sense of compassion and you feel bad for them. I mean, there's only so much you can do. And when you get back to your quarters, you try not to dwell on it. You did everything you did everything you could,
right?
And you definitely don't want to take that home with you. Leave work at work.
How do you do that though? I mean, especially having 4 children. So Chris, my audio engineer, his older brother has been my best friend since kindergarten. That's how we know each other. And I remember him telling me, he's like, I was prepared for everything until I had kids. And I saw the destructive nature of a car accident with kids involved. He's like, that screwed him up for months. Like, he's like, before kids, he felt like he was, impenetrable, could have no emotions, whatnot. But then once he had kids, I remember him telling me, man, the first car accident I rolled up on where there was either kids involved or I knew this was somebody's father or mother who wasn't going to make it home, it wrecked me. And he was a mess for a while. He had to learn how to compartmentalize that. So how do you balance family, wife, 4 daughters, and then going to work and doing something where you're having to respond to these things?
You nailed the word. It was compartmentalization. You learn to put that away, but when you go home and you're dealing with your wife or your kids, or I think you get to be a little overprotective. In many ways. You want to make sure that they're doing the right thing, that they've got the right values, and they're not going to be out screwing around or hot rodding or and that's always a concern, that's always a worry. But sometimes you got to have faith that you taught them right.
And for context, how old are your children? Are they all grown now, out of the house, or any of them still living with you out in the middle of nowhere?
Kim is the oldest, and she is 32 this year, I think.
Okay.
I'd have to look. And our youngest will turn 23 this year.
Oh, so you're all done.
Yeah, they're all grown and moved out.
Are you a grandparent yet?
Yep, got 1 granddaughter. So
awesome. Now you get to spoil them. You don't have to worry about the hard stuff.
She comes and hangs out with us for about a month in the summer, and we ride the quads and go do this and that and the other thing, and then take her home.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit, like you mentioned, you don't have an outline, But you've got to have an idea before you start fleshing out a story, or else you'd probably get 100 pages in and be like, oh no, this is garbage. This is not where I want it to go. So when that's happened?
Yep.
Oh, really? You've just ditched like 100 pages?
I have. When I start to write, I have a basic idea rolling around in my head of what I want to do. And then I'll start fleshing that out. I do have a file on my computer that is labeled trash, and everything that I don't like just goes in that file. I don't throw anything away because you never know. You might be able to come back to that. But it's 100% by the seat of my pants. And I joke a lot that my characters tell me where we're going and what we're doing that day. So
really?
Yeah.
So in your, like, you almost have a medical diagnosis of like split personality, right? Because you're walking around all the time with like thoughts of Jason Sterling, like, what would he think today? Where would he want to go on this mission or this adventure or this save the world?
It does work like that. Yeah. We'll be driving home. Like, we'll go to town and go grocery shopping, and we'll be driving home, and the wife and I'll be having a conversation, and, she's got the music on, got her podcasts on or whatever. And all of a sudden I'll just go like silent and driving and staring out the road. And it took her a little while to figure out what was going on, because basically what happens is my brain clicks on and say, okay, this is what we're writing tonight. And
she looks over you, she says, okay, am I talking to Jason right now, or am I talking to Sean?
Yeah. Who's here in the car with me?
Yeah. I do that. And I don't have the excuse that I'm writing a book. I just like zone out, and my wife's like, hello. Are we talking? I guess we're done talking now. And I'm like, oh, sorry, honey. I was like kind of in my thoughts, but I don't really know what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, it does happen that way. It'll be the same, if we're working around the homestead, we'll be doing whatever, in the summertime or springtime, should be planting flowers, and, I'll be building boxes for flowers and stuff. And all of a sudden I'm just kind of zoned out doing my own thing in my head and on autopilot, basically.
So I was listening to a podcast with the guy who writes the Gray Man series, and one of them just got made into a movie on Netflix. And what's interesting is, I've read many versions of the post-apocalyptic, the EMP hits and there's no electronics, or there's a dirty bomb or whatever goes off. I've read many of those books, and I find that the authors, when I do a little bit of research on them, they're either like far right or far left. And I don't mean that as a political, I just mean that as the pendulum swings. Yeah. They're either like, they live in an apartment in the middle of downtown LA, and this is the furthest thing from their reality, and they're just trying to flesh out what it might look like if they live the exact opposite life. Or maybe they're on the crazy prepper side, where they're like, I don't want anybody within 100 miles unless they're part of my community. I've got my gold buried in the backyard. I ordered a 5,000 gallon diesel tank because it's all coming to an end March 30th of 2023. And I get the feeling that you're kind of in the middle. Am I pegging that right? Like,
you're pretty close.
Okay.
I mentioned on the homestead, we live in the middle of nowhere. I mean, my nearest neighbor is 800 yards away. Ask me how I know that. But
you've probably cited it in. I don't know. I'm just
we have traded numbers. Yes.
Yeah.
But I've had people ask me, well, why'd you move out in the middle of nowhere? Is it because you're a prepper? No, it's just kind of been a dream of ours. The prepper thing kind of coincides with it. We do have to keep extra food, extra fuel, and extra stuff on hand, because we only do our shopping once a month.
Right.
And this time of year in the winter, roads get washed out.
Right.
There's times that we can't get to town. So I was a prepper before, not one of these, burying my stuff in the backyard, but
right.
Kind of the middle of the road prepper, I guess you could say. Got the food, the water, the medical supplies, all of that. And it can be taken to an extreme. I mean, a detrimental extreme.
Right.
And I try to stay in the middle of that somewhere.
Well, the idea of prepping up until there were major, huge cities was just the idea of owning your own house, right? Yeah, like you had some chickens, you had a couple drums of gas, like you could make it through a season without having to resupply from the major town that was a couple of hours away by horse or by, Model T or whatnot. So it's funny that the prepper movement has become like, oh, Wait, you want to own your own land? And you want to be a little self-sufficient with like your food or a garden? You must be one of these crazy right-wing preppers. It's like, no, I just want to be prepared. Like, that doesn't make me like, I don't think the zombie apocalypse is coming tomorrow. I just want food and water for a couple weeks and say in case the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, and I don't want to go to town. I mean, going to town once a month is fine with me. We moved out there 5 years ago, and we lived in a small suburb outside of Reno, and I pretty much grew up out there. My parents moved us here in '77, and I've lived out in this valley my almost whole life. And it just, you don't realize how much noise creeps in. The traffic, the horns, the dogs barking, everything, all of it. And when we bought our property, it was, like I said, it was kind of a dream of ours to move out in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Just enjoy the silence and the solace, and see the clear skies at night and breathe the fresh air, and not have dogs barking 24/7 or cars racing up and down the streets. So it wasn't a prepper move. It was just a self-preservation move, I think.
And do you think this is, because my wife and I have this debate all the time. We have little ones, a 5 and a 7-year-old. Could you have done this with little kids?
It would have been tremendously more difficult. I do know people that are trying to do it with kids, but they're not enjoying it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's there's an area, and I won't mention where it is or what the city is, but it's about an hour outside of Austin proper, where a lot, and I mean a lot, of my wealthier friends have moved, and they're they all have 5, 10, 20, 30 acres, and they're setting up a little enclave of kind of their own middle of nowhere. And because they all have kids, they've kind of banded together, and they've built their own school. They've brought in awesome. Basically like a Montessori type curriculum, and they're building their own way, but exponentially harder when you have little kids that need to be educated and socialized and have sports or something. I mean, it's just because I'm like you. I would be super happy having my podcast studio, being able to live stream, coaching. I can take a mortgage application from anywhere. I'm like, hun, like, why are we not living out in the middle of nowhere? They're like, because your kids will be weird. And I'm like, all right, fair. We will have weird kids if we live in the middle of nowhere and they have no socialization other than mom and dad.
Yeah, and it was something we talked about. My wife and I had talked about for a long time. And when the youngest was getting ready to graduate high school and start doing her own thing, it was like, now's the time. Now's our chance.
I love it.
Do this.
And are you retired from the fire services, or do you still have to do some work with them?
Nope, I am completely retired. I retired 2 years ago.
Nice, so, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
And of course, you then had to start another full-time job writing.
It's the nice thing about it is I set the hours.
Fair enough.
My commute is from my bedroom to my kitchen table, so
perfect. And what do you do? Wait, okay, I guess if you're writing at night, your wife can do her own thing or go to bed or whatnot. But does she ever feel like, hey, honey, Jason can wait. I'm over here. I need some time with my husband.
There's a lot of nights we'll just hang out and watch TV or Netflix or whatever, and but like during the day, it's nothing to go for a quad ride or I mean, we've got hot springs that are 15 miles from our house. So, we can always go down there and chill out or just go explore the desert.
I love it. What, either, growing up or while you had some downtime at the fire department to read, watch movies, what was your go-to genre or some of your favorite books, movies, television stories growing up that like informs your writing, the characters you've come up with?
I used to be a huge fan of like Cussler or Clancy.
Yeah.
I was always into the whatever genre you want to call that, but
kind of like espionage, political thriller type stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then I kind of moved into the post-apocalyptic stuff probably 10, 12 years ago.
Okay.
And just I found it fascinating. And I got hooked. And the sad thing is that I don't get to read nearly as much as I want to now. Before, it was nothing to go through 2, 3, 4 books a month. Now I'm lucky if I get like one a year.
Oh,
I do use Audible. But again, the only time I really use it is when I'm in the car going somewhere. So that helps alleviate some of that. But
I was just listening to the book 1 Second After, kind of famous prepper type book, and I was like, oh yeah, this feels very similar. So I'm guessing you're similar setup with the EMP and whatnot. I'm guessing you've read 1 Second After.
Yep, I read 1 Second After. The one book that got me started, I can pinpoint it. It was Lights Out by David Crawford.
Lights Out. I'm gonna have to read that.
Yeah, and I was actually reading it because as he was writing it, he was posting it in online forums.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so the finished version was actually quite a bit different than the original online version. But I think that's the one that got me started in the post-apocalyptic genre.
Nice. And a lot of political stuff comes up in post-apocalyptic books where there's any type of functioning anything, government, even if it's just 100 people, or Alco, I think by the end of book 2 is 3,000 or 4,000 people. So it's like at some point, I'm a pretty hardcore libertarian, but myself and my tutor who helped me get this podcast launched, he's like, we came up with this term, I don't know if this is a real term or not, like this night watchman libertarian, right? Where it's like eventually you get big projects over 1,000 people or so, you got to have some type of government structure, right? I'm not an anarchist, everybody for themselves. And so this will come up in books. Are you a particularly political person? Are you more apolitical? Are you more right-wing, left-wing? Because I feel like I can catch some themes in the book, but you never come right out and say it.
I would call myself pretty middle of the road. I do lean to the right.
Yeah.
But I try not to bring too much of that to my books. I've read authors that do bring a ton of political into the books, and that's always kind of a turnoff for me.
Oh, interesting.
And I want the story, and I in book 1 particularly, I did bring some of the politics into it, just in kind of passing.
Right.
And then I really kind of veered away from that just because, it's I don't discuss openly, my politics with,
right.
And I didn't feel the need to bring that into my books.
Yeah. Yeah. And like Michael Jordan famously said, he's like, hey, I don't talk about this stuff. Republicans buy sneakers too.
Yep.
And exactly. So you kind of know where he leans by that statement, but he's like, I'm not going to preach to the choir because probably 30 to 50% of the people that buy my shoes and make me a multi-millionaire, they're probably Republicans, and I don't want to alienate 50% of my audience.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't really care about anymore. I don't care about what side of the aisle you fall on. If you're a good dude, you're a good dude. That's all that matters.
Yeah, I love that. So we're seeing, we're filming this early March 2023, and this will probably come out April or May of 2023. So it'll be very weird if this podcast is prophetic in any way. But, we just saw the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. And the government has now said, they changed their tune in 36 hours from we're not doing anything, we're not bailing them out, to like, oh, a bunch of tech billionaires who are big donors of both political parties had a lot of ties to Silicon Valley Bank. So now all of a sudden the government's going to step in and backstop all those deposits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you look at, 2 years ago in COVID, there was some weird run on toilet paper that made no sense to me. Like, why wasn't there a run on water, canned goods, ammo? Well, I guess there was a run on ammo, but for the toilet paper became the thing. And so I was trying to talk to some of my friends that think this whole being prepared movement is just silly. And I'm like, hey man, COVID, no matter where you stood on it politically, now that we know the end results, had about a 0.1% death rate, and we ran out of toilet paper. Imagine if there was a 10% death rate. Do you think anybody's going to Albertsons to restock the shelves if there's a 1 in 10 chance they're going to die of COVID? So now due to toilet paper, or now due to food, what happened with toilet paper, now due to like one bank in America to like Wells Fargo or B of A going under, and then that cascading through, there seems to be a lot of reminders over the last 3 or 4 years that the ideas in this book of like supply chain breaking down, banks going insolvent, maybe electronics stopping overnight, it's not as far-fetched as I think people thought it was 5 years ago.
Yeah. And, it's the opportunity for things to fall apart is there. I had a friend he came into town the other day to go do his grocery shopping, and as you know, up here in northern Nevada, we've had a hellacious winter.
Yeah, unprecedented amount of snow, right?
Yeah, and the highways have been closed. Yeah, I mean, it's been going on what, 2 weeks now. And he was saying when he came back, he was telling me that there was a lot of stuff that wasn't on the shelves. He couldn't get most of his groceries. And the opportunity for failure is there, and it doesn't have to be something big and spectacular.
Right.
Something as simple as snow can shut down your supply lines.
Yeah, I was talking to an area I'm very familiar with because I went there every summer as a boy for summer camp, is Lake Arrowhead, Big Bear area up above California. It's about 40 miles, maybe 70 miles outside of downtown LA. On a warm summer day, you can get there in an hour. It's beautiful, whatnot. So they had an unprecedented amount of snow up there. Basically, all the supplies are running out. And Highway Patrol has been having to shovel one lane of snow up and down the hill and take a convoy of supplies up and a convoy of supplies down because they can only shovel out one lane of snow. And I was trying to tell my friend of mine, I was like, hey, imagine if simultaneously with that, there was a giant earthquake in Southern California where, the Highway Patrol had to divert efforts to what was going on in kind of the Los Angeles basin where a giant earthquake would, cause a lot of problems. I'm like, all of a sudden that hillside turns into Mad Max within about 4 days. Cause and I was trying to explain to this, I'm like, if you saw your child starving, what would you do? Like you would become a pretty hellacious person in about 3 or 4 days. It only takes about 9 missed meals before human beings start doing some crazy stuff. And I'm like, that's happening right now in 2023 in the most modern society we've ever seen. And I could see the light bulb going on above his head, like, oh yeah, maybe we should have some food and water at our house. I'm like, yeah, no shit, man.
Yeah, and I've had people ask me, well, how do I get into the prepping? You start small. I mean, just even when you go grocery shopping, if you just buy one extra can of something that you use, and set it aside, you're one can ahead of where you were. Your biggest asset in any type of emergency is what's between your ears. It's not how many guns you have or how much ammo you have, or your biggest asset is right here between your ears. And it's amazing how quickly this can degrade when you're faced with real trials. It's take a medical, go to the community college and take a first responder class or a basic first aid class or something. That way you have just an idea of what you need to be prepared for. You can have all the guns, you can have all the ammo and food and water, but if you don't know how to use it properly, you might as well not have it at all.
Right.
And just its skills are just as important as having, tens of thousands of dollars worth of stuff. So,
yeah, I was thinking, like, in a modern society, how quickly things can go wrong. I almost had to do this interview with an eye patch on. For those of you that aren't on YouTube, I've got an eye patch in my pocket just in case the smoke irritates my eye. So I was at jiu-jitsu the other day, and 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100,000 chance of this happening. A guy was doing jiu-jitsu with some board shorts, like some surf shorts on instead of like some jiu-jitsu spats or whatever. And the end of the drawstring on his shorts had like a little metal fastener on it. And as he's whipping across my body, the metal fastener scraped my eye and scraped my cornea. And so, I was kind of freaked out. Adrenaline's going when you're at jiu-jitsu, and then we finish, and I come back home, and I'm like, man, it feels like an eyelash is poking me in the eye. And then my wife looked at it, she's like, yeah, something's wrong. So we did the emergency room thing, and the guy's like, oh yeah, you're fine. The eye is amazing. It'll heal within about 3 or 4 days. But the thing that can go wrong is if it gets infected, like you lose your eye and the infection can get into your brain. So, again, like a 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100,000 occurrence where you scratch your cornea, then it's maybe like a 1 in 500 chance it gets infected. But then if that happens, you die and you like lose your eye at minimum. Minimum, you lose your eye. Worst case scenario, you die. And I was like, wow, that's some crazy stuff that can go wrong real fast. So they gave me some little antibiotic drips for my eyes. I've been putting them in my eye. Everything's fine. But I'm like, oh man, if there was no emergency room, if there was no antibiotics or at least some Visine to wash my eyes out once in a while to make sure it's not getting infected, like stuff can go bad real fast.
Yep. A simple cut, it'll kill you if it's not taken care of. It just kind of a funny story is back in 2020, I was supposed to retire in October of 2020. And that summer, it was early June, I think it was. And I was at home and the window on our travel trailer had gotten broken. So I was up on a ladder and trying to put the new window in, and a wind gust came out of nowhere and caught the door, caught the ladder, and sent me to the ground. And I've blown my knees out before, so I knew exactly what was going on when I hit the ground. Um, and it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and my wife is like, "Oh my God, we got to get you to the doctor, and we got to get you to the emergency room." And I'm like, "I am not going to the emergency room, because by the time we get there, it's going to be 7 o'clock. And by the time they send us home, it's going to be 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
I'm not up for that. We'll just go in the morning."
Typical man, by the way. I don't need to go to the doctor. Good job.
Ice it and prop it up, and we'll wrap it, and we'll just get through the night. That was a miserable night, by the way. But we go into the urgent care the next morning, and they take x-rays and do all of that. And they're like, "Yeah, you messed your knee up. You blew the meniscus out, and you actually fractured the plane where your kneecap rides." And oh crap, okay, I guess I did screw it up pretty good. Was out of work for like 3 weeks, and then they did the surgery and everything else. But I'll never forget the guy that did the MRI saying, "Yeah, you didn't just destroy the meniscus, excuse me." He says, you vaporized it. That's how hard the impact was. But had we panicked and gone to town, it would have been hours and hours and hours before we got home. And we've got animals to take care of and all of that. And being on crutches for 3 months around the homestead was a big ball of suck. I gotta give it to my wife. I mean, she stepped up the game big time, and she did all the chores I couldn't do. And it's just how quickly something, I mean, in an instant, it was, I was down.
Yeah, total fluke, right?
Yeah, just a gust of wind.
Oh man. And then you start adding to, running a ranch or an operating homestead like you have. You add some animals, you add some power tools, you add a gun once in a while. Like inevitably you're going to have some accident where you're like, "Oh, this could be real bad if we didn't have access to modern medicine."
Yeah, exactly. Inside the cabinet in our kitchen, we don't have our address written down. We've got our ground coordinates written down, so that when if we ever have to call 911, the only thing coming out there is a helicopter.
Right.
And, we can give them the ground coordinates so the helicopter can pinpoint us. But, to get any kind of emergency response out there, you're talking an hour and a half minimum before they'll show up.
So
they can find you.
I have an uncle very similar to your situation. He's out in the middle of nowhere, and when we get off the podcast, I'll tell you where it's at, because you guys might be neighbors. He's about an hour and 15 minutes or so outside of Reno, and he's getting up there in age, but he's a mountain man. I think at 80, he's in better shape than I am at 44. He still goes, hiking out in the middle of nowhere to take down moose with a bow and arrow and shit. He's like Paul Bunyan. And, but he's getting up there in age. So they actually have, to your point, they have a small rider on their insurance policy that covers helicopter evacuation. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, why do you have that? He's like, "Look around, dude." He's like, "It's an hour and a half back to Reno to like modern medical facilities. If I have a heart attack or, your aunt falls and breaks her hip or something, you're not taking an ambulance into town. You need a helicopter." And so same thing. I think they pay $1,000 a year or $2,000 a year or something as an insurance policy so that they don't get dinged with a $50,000 ride to the hospital on a helicopter.
Yep.
These are things you don't have to think about when you live in downtown LA or downtown Las Vegas.
No, you make a call and, 2 minutes later, they're at your door,
Yeah.
Not out there.
Yeah. So what does that look like for you when you're out there on your ranch? Obviously, to your point, emergency services aren't responding anytime soon. So, if I'm just driving up your driveway, "Hey neighbor, you gotta handle your own protection and stuff, right? Because like the cops aren't anywhere near us."
Yep. And okay, so I have the very first truck I ever owned was a 75 Dodge Power Wagon. I still have that truck, and it's equipped to fight fire now. It's in my driveway. It's my fire truck, because when the fires come through there, it's not if, it's when the fires come through there, we're going to be charged with our own protection out there. And it's the same way. If I know you're coming, I won't reach you on the deck with a gun in my hand. But
Right.
if I don't know who you are and I don't know the vehicle, there's always a handgun close.
Yeah. Fair.
I mean, it's just about all of my friends that live out there. There's a few of us. They know that my wife and I both have backgrounds in emergency medicine, and we do have medical kits, and we can respond quickly if need be. For my neighbors, if there's a fire and one of their sheds is on fire or something, or the car's on fire, I'll come hauling ass down there in the fire truck. But we all pretty much police ourselves, and I think one of the golden rules out there is if you're stopping to talk to somebody on the road, or you're whatever on your quad, you can always assume somebody's armed. Everybody's armed.
Yeah.
And I think it makes for a much politer neighborhood.
Yeah. Funny how that happens when everybody might have a gun, how much nicer people are, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It's interesting to me. This is the dilemma of living in a big city or our modern society where everybody feels connected because of social media and whatnot. You mentioned your nearest neighbor is 800 yards away. I guarantee you know him better than I know the person who currently lives 18 feet away. I think I know his name, and I think I know his wife's name. I still don't know his daughter's name. Could we probably knock on each other's door in case of an emergency? Yeah, we've had a barbecue. We've met a couple times. Like, I would definitely feel comfortable having my kids run over there if dad had a heart attack or something. But I don't know him. I don't know what his skills are in an emergency situation. He has no idea what I have in my house in the event of an emergency situation. It's kind of a sad indictment of society that, like, we don't even really know our neighbors anymore unless you live out in the middle of nowhere and you might have to actually depend on your neighbors.
Exactly. And that's one of the awesome things about living out there. I mean, the neighbors, the good neighbors, I mean, there's you go across the valley and into the other state, and not so good neighbors over there, but they know to steer clear of our side of the valley.
Yeah.
They're not welcome over there.
Yeah.
But, we all help each other out. We're just a text away or a phone call away.
Yeah. So I have a question about maybe realizations, and this will be for your personal life and then writing the book. So moving out to the middle of nowhere, which can be kind of idealized, right? You guys have been looking for this for a while. What's been the biggest realization of, like, oh shit, I didn't think of this, or this is a big pain in the butt that we were not planning on, or this is some gear we have to have that I never thought in a million years I would own one of those. So maybe, like, in your real life, what's a big realization? And then in writing the book and having to flesh out these characters in this self-contained society of the ranch where they're, it's not only their homestead, it's also their Alamo, and it's also their fuel depot, and it's everything else. What has some realizations been in the nonfiction world of, Sean's Real House, and what has been some realizations in the fictional world of writing these stories?
In the real world, I think our biggest, this one caught me totally blindside, was tires. And how, I mean, we live 30 miles down a dirt road. And I think in the first year, I went through 3 sets of tires on my truck.
Whoa.
Rocks and whatever would tear them up, just destroy them. And it was the same way for our Durango. And so that was a huge one that I didn't see coming.
So now you just got a barn full of tires?
We buy good tires now, and I mean, we don't skimp on them. I've learned I had never repaired a tire on my own before. Now it's not that uncommon to do. I can dismount my own tires and patch them and plug them, whatever I need to do, and be good to go. I don't have to take it to the tire shop. You learn skills like that along the way. And I think the other big misconception on my part was how much solar we would need. We were way underpowered to begin with.
Oh, really?
And so we've had to upgrade our system over the last couple of years, and now we can run pretty much everything we want.
So are you totally on solar out where you're at? No city resources?
100% solar.
So solar well, septic, and then do you get like a refuel of propane or gas or?
Yeah, we don't even use a septic. We recycle our gray water, from the showers and the sinks,
Yeah.
to water the trees that we're going to be planting, and we use a composting toilet. And that
Oh,
can also, yeah. So I mean, that was a learning curve, but we figured it out. We got it taken care of, and it works. I mean, we've been using that for 4 years consistently now.
composting toilet. You are really in the middle of nowhere.
It works fantastic.
Explain to the people at home that don't know anything about survival or living off the grid what a composting toilet is, because this is fascinating.
So the composting toilet that we have, the only power it uses is there's a small 12 volt, like a little tiny computer fan in there that circulates the air, and then there's a vent that goes outside to vent the bad air out. And the composting toilet, we use a coconut core in the base of ours, and once you do your number 2, you cycle it over, and the fan blows the moisture off, because that's what causes all the smells, is the moisture.
Right.
And for like the urine, there's a tank, and you can actually use that to water your trees or your flowers because it's rich in nitrogen. And we spread that around. We use that and it works great.
It's just for people that still aren't getting the image. A composting toilet is a really fancy indoor Andy Gump, like a porta potty.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, you guys are really off the grid.
But I mean, we've other than that, we've got all the other modern conveniences. Microwave, stove, showers, hot water. And I mean, all of our TV stuff and internet is on satellites. So.
Yeah, my back to my mountain man uncle. He's again out in the middle of nowhere. I think they get a refuel once a year of like propane. They have one of these giant tanks. But most of their heat comes from like a wood burning stove, which I had no idea a little tiny potbelly stove in the middle of a 2,000 square foot house will heat that thing to a sweat lodge temperature. It's like, it's crazy. I remember I was sleeping in like one of the spare bedrooms the last time I stayed there, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be freezing. Can I get some extra blankets? They're like, trust me, you're gonna be okay. And I woke up in the middle of the night like I was in a sweat lodge. I was like, Jesus, I gotta open the door. It's like 10 degrees outside. I'm like, I gotta open the window. I'm dying in here. And they're like, and it was like 85 degrees in the house. I'm like, what are you trying to do? Kill me? Because those potbelly stoves will get real hot and just it's amazing how much it'll heat a house.
Yeah. See, we went with a tiny house. I mean, we're 200 square feet.
What?
It's just the two. Yeah, it's just me and my wife. So and the dogs and cats. So we went with 200 square feet. We went from basically 1,600 square feet, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, down to 200 square feet.
And your wife hasn't killed you yet?
No, it works out good. Let me tell you, if you're going to do this off-grid thing in a tiny home, you better like the person you're with.
Yeah, I love my wife to death, but after like maybe an hour or two of conversation, she's Hispanic, so like sitting around the dinner table and talking for 6 hours, like that's her version of entertainment. And I'm like, hon, like I got to listen to a podcast or something. Like I love you to death, but there's only so much I can hear about catching up on your day. So we might need like 500 square feet. I'd need a separate office or something.
But I mean, it works and we took a long time to decide what we wanted.
Yeah,
and the tiny home seemed to be the way to go because it just works for us,
Do you have like a 200 square foot house and like 1,000 square foot barn, wood storage, emergency supply shelter? Or
no, we do have another 200 square foot shed that we use for storage and stuff, and then we call it my room, and that's where it's 200 square feet, and I keep my tools out there, and we keep our supplies out there and stuff like that. But going back to the heating thing, we use a Chinese diesel heater to keep our house warm in the winter.
Interesting.
And on an average winter, over the course of a month, we'll go through about 25 gallons of propane or of diesel.
Interesting.
And yeah, my 1 ton will burn that going to town and back, but
yeah,
that'll last us the whole month. And 90% of the winter, my wife sleeps with her window open because it's warm in there.
Yeah, totally fair. So does diesel stabilize as well? Like, can you keep a couple hundred gallons of diesel without going bad if you're only burning like 25 a month?
I keep generally year round, I keep about 20 gallons handy.
Okay.
And I'm always rotating it out.
Yeah.
And we do the same with gasoline, because we do have a backup generator. We got the quads, and we have had people stop by saying, I didn't realize, my navigation system told me to go this way, and I didn't realize how far it was to the next gas station. Here's 10 gallons, go. Just
Right.
get out of here.
See you later. Get off my property.
Yeah. But, and we always rotate our fuels out. We do use stabilizers in them. The only thing that uses propane is our on-demand water heater and my grill. So
love it. I want to get back to the book. You mentioned that the first story had kind of been sitting and ruminating in your mind for a while. I'm guessing the ranch, and then you got to flesh out the characters. And like I said, I'm only into book 3, but the scope of the world starts getting much bigger away from the ranch pretty quickly. So I have to imagine you've got some thoughts in your head somewhere, or it's the idea is coming from somewhere. So can you talk about like fleshing out the world of the ranch, and then Alco, and then into Las Vegas, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Like where does this all come from? Is it real life experience? Is it something that you're expecting to actually happen when the world goes down, or where does this all come from?
I think as authors, we all have our own vision of what the world's going to look like if something bad happens. But, and this is kind of my vision, I guess you would say, of that. There's always the hope that the good guys will pull together and keep things from going off the rails so bad. But there's some of it is personal experiences, seeing how bad things can go and how quick. It's just kind of drawing on all of that.
Yeah, I like that. I'm trying to think how I can phrase it without giving too much away. I like that there's clearly some good guys and some bad guys, but you also have a whole lot of ambiguous characters, right? Like I'm thinking of the traders in book 2, and even the way that the thought of the Mexican cartels get flushed out. And, there's not just this clear, and again, I won't give too much away, but in the second book on who's really running Vegas and how it was running, like there are clearly some good guys and bad guys, but there's a lot more ambiguity of just like, hey man, the world went to shit. This is how I'm trying to survive. And you're like, all right, cool. You're not a cannibalist crazy man eating babies. You're probably doing some stuff I wouldn't agree with, but I get it. Can you talk a little bit about that ambiguity?
Readers are smart people. And I think that some authors forget that, and they try to paint the entire picture for them. If you leave a little ambiguity there, the reader can fill in the blanks, and they it's like describing what a character looks like. I could spend pages and pages and pages doing that, but if I give them just the basics, let them build their own pictures in their head, and it's the same with the ambiguity. The characters that you're talking about, they are not bad guys, but they're not good. They're kind of shady and not so shady. They kind of play both sides of the spectrum there.
Right.
And then there's like the one, I don't want to spoil it. There's one bad guy that you really, really, really want to like. And sometimes he's like, spot on with what he's thinking. And then there's other things that he does that you're like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that.
Right.
And it's, you try to give the readers some rein to build the story, build the pictures in their mind. And as an author, it can sometimes be hard to give them that.
Yeah.
Give them that leeway, because I want to paint that picture. I want to show them what a character looks like. I want to draw all those definitives in there. But they're smart people, and it's a lot of fun to see some of the conclusions that they come up with.
So in a perfect world, let's say your book gets optioned for a movie. Like who plays Jason Sterling? Like who in your mind, when you're writing this character, who are you like, I was really thinking of Chuck Norris, to be honest, but probably not Chuck Norris. But like in a perfect world, who would you like to see play some of these characters?
I think the one that stuck with me, I've asked this question before. The one that stuck with me and it would make the most sense would be a guy that looks like John Hamm.
Yes. John Hamm would be good.
That voice and his mannerisms, I think would be good. I've been asked about Jill, and that one is is kind of hard. I think the best suggestion I ever got would be like Gal Gadot.
Yes.
And
Super
okay,
hot
yeah,
and
I can
also
see
super
that.
tough.
Yeah, I can see that. Those are some fantastic suggestions. And yeah, the power couple from what was that? There was a Law and Order show or true crime show, whatever it was, and there was the power couple in there. God, I can't even remember the name of
Wait,
it.
special victims unit, Stabler, and the really kind of hard nosed guy and the gal that was very loving. You got to look this up, Chris. The power couple from special victims unit. I know exactly who you're talking to.
Yeah,
About.
I've had them suggested too. As being perfect for those roles. And it's like, okay, I could see that too. And the descriptions of of the characters are as varied as there are readers.
Who are they?
Michael Furstein and Alyssa Sutherland.
Okay,
yeah, the actresses. Yeah, I can't remember what their names were on the show. I know he was Stabler and she was from Special Victims Unit, the older ones. They're a little past their prime though on both acting and the looks for their age. So you'd probably have to go for a younger version of them. But I like that. I like that a lot. I'm glad you didn't go with like Tom Cruise or one of those super good looking guys, because I feel like Jason Sterling is just that kind of every guy who you could put your own mind and body and look into.
Yeah, exactly.
So I try to think of like, I have a hard enough time describing myself. When somebody asks what you are, because no one person is just one thing, right? Like, I do loans for a living and I do that 50, 60 hours a week. But ironically, because I'm pretty public about the other stuff I do, I've lost business because people think, oh, well, you're just busy doing this podcast, or you also do coaching. Like, no one person is one thing. And so I think about, from an author like you writing a fiction book, you've got to think about the depth of, first 5 characters, then 20 characters. And now into book 3, we're up to probably 40 or 50 characters, some of which have not lived, who actually matters. How do you keep that straight in your mind of like, oh, I'm fleshing out this character, but she can't be too much like Jill, and Jill can't be too much like Lisa, and Lisa can't be too much like Susan. And it's like, I just feel like that would drive me crazy.
I have spent, I do every once in a while, I'll go back through my old manuscripts, and if there's a, like when I was writing book 7, I'm not going to put anything out there, but I did have to go back to book 1 and actually bring pieces of book 1 back into book 7, and that way I didn't screw it up. I got it right.
Right.
The continuity thing there. But as far as characters go, there are times I've had to go back and reread, some of their primary functions, and it's like, okay, yeah, I remember now, and then I'll carry on. But these are very distinct people in my head.
Yeah. As I get into book 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, am I going to be really upset that anybody's moral compass like completely shifts?
Maybe.
That's a yes. That's totally. I'm gonna be rooting against somebody I currently love.
But when you get into, there's some change of hearts in there. So.
Yeah. So tell me about just the journey for you as an entrepreneur. Like you said, you wrote this first book. You're like, cool, man. Maybe 10 people will read it, then 25, then 100. I think I looked up, you'll have to look this up, Chris, the Jack Sterling series. Maybe you can look on Audible or Amazon. Between the 7 books, how many reviews are there? I mean, you got to be up to like thousands of reviews now or something. Because I think there was, just on the one book I was looking at, there was a couple hundred. So this journey from like, oh, cool, I'm going to write this thing and I'll self-publish it, and oh my gosh, now I'm making some money off of it. Oh, wait, now this publisher wants to pay me some money, to like, oh, now I'm at book 7. Well, first question, is book 7 the end? Like, have you told the story you want to tell, or is there offshoots and different characters and different genres, and he actually lives at the end of book 7? I haven't got there yet, but are you done, or is there more?
I'm still writing. I'm actually starting. I'm pretty close to being done with the first book of a new series.
Oh, nice.
So, and it's something completely different than what we're used to with the Sterling, the Legacy series. Book 7 is Officially, but not really officially, the last book in the Legacy series.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I do have opportunities to explore other stories in the Legacy universe there.
Right.
And I haven't decided if I'm going to do it yet or not, because I'm one of those writers that if I'm working on a book, I have to work on a book.
Right.
I can't. I mean, I know lots of writers, and I don't know how they do it, but they work on 3, 4, 5 different manuscripts at a time.
Oh,
Yeah, I couldn't. But you know, when I start a book, I have to finish it, and the Legacy series is for now is finished. Is there a possibility of something in the future? Yeah, there is, and you never say never.
yeah. Depends how much they
So,
pay you, right?
you know, um, I'm getting the fans have been screaming. You know, when's book 8 in the series coming out? Oh God,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, it's like The Walking Dead told a whole story and a whole universe centered around Atlanta, basically. And then they're like, oh, this is what we're doing. This is the direction the comics went. And they're like, well, what if we pay you this amount of money? They're like, LA, we're going to talk about The Walking Dead in LA and Mexico. That's where we'll go next. So, I mean, you got a whole world you could explore post EMP blast.
Yeah, I kind of did that with book 7, because book 7 actually goes right back to the beginning, but we pick it up with different characters.
Awesome.
And I mean, they're familiar characters. We know who they are, and we know how their story ends, but how did they get there? And we explore that.
That's awesome. So can you give us a teaser on what the new series is about, or is that like under wraps with your publicist?
No, it's not under wraps. It's based in Northern Nevada again. And it's plague, you know, post-COVID mindset kind of thing. It's zombie-esque without the zombies.
Got it.
So yeah, it's been a blast to write. And I'm closing in on the end, so hopefully I can have that to my publisher by the end of the month.
And when you write, I know you said you don't make an outline, you don't do a thing, you just kind of free form write with your thoughts. But you know, books have structure, chapters and dialogue scenes versus descriptive scenes and stuff like that. Do you really just free form and be like, that's a good chapter break, and then free form some more, or like from idea to like, all right, I got to send this off to the editor for, you know, to make sure I got all the correct versions of there versus there versus there and see where I missed apostrophes. How long is that process from like idea to, all right, put this in the hands of the editor to edit my book and make sure I don't sound like a 5th grader with some of my punctuation and such? Or I don't know, maybe you're really good at grammar. I'm horrible.
I'm horrible.
Okay, good.
Horrible.
I feel good now.
It's funny that you bring that up, because I go back to book 1, and whenever I have to reread a piece of it, and you know, like I said in book 7, I brought a lot of the some of the conversations over, and it was hard for me to not fix it on the spot in book 7. I wanted to keep the original text and the original, but it showed me just how much I've grown between book 1 and book 7 in the way that I write and how much I've evolved. From beginning to end, this new series that I'm working on now, in about a month, I hammered out probably 75% of the book.
Oh my gosh.
And
that's amazing, man.
It was blowing me away too. I couldn't believe it, but it was, you run with it when it's hot, you're hot, you know? And then I had to take a couple of weeks off, because I mean, there was a lot going on. It's winter time up here. We, you know, and the ideas weren't flowing as I wanted them to. And I won't force it. I won't sit down and tell myself I have to write.
Right.
You know, because that does not work for me. And 99% of the time, what I write when I try to do that gets axed. I mean, it ends up on the cutting room floor fast. And you know, there's nothing wrong with taking a step back from your work and going and doing something else completely, entirely, you know?
Yeah.
And coming back to it, because it gives you a fresh mindset. It gives you a new insight. And maybe you have that conversation in your head with your characters. Okay, where are we going? What are we doing here? You know?
Right.
You know, and I think the longest one that took me the longest to write was book 3. And that was right around 14 months.
Okay. That makes me feel better, by the way. When you're talking about knocking out most of a book in a month, I'm like, I kind of hate this guy. 14 months, we can be friends again.
Generally, I mean, my goal was to write one a year.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I stick to that. When books 4 and 5 came out, they were released like I was right. They were supposed to be one book, and I ended up splitting them in two. So I already had 2 manuscripts that were 3/4 finished. So I finished book 4 within a month. I had book 5 to my editor or my publisher, and so there was 2 back to back. And then I started.
Your publisher was probably stoked after that. They're like, we're going to get 70 books out of this guy in the next 5 months or in the next 5 years. And you're like, no, dude, that was an oddity.
That was a fluke. Yeah.
Yeah.
that just kind of happened. And then book 7 took me, I don't know, 6 months to write. Yeah, about that. But,
so,
do
you have any formal training? Because, one of my limiting beliefs, I've written a nonfiction book, a business book, and that was kind of a labor of love. And then I sent it over to the editor, and she's like, hey, I got good news and I got bad news. And I was like, all right, give it to me. She's like, well, the good news is I'm not related to your industry at all. I don't care about lead generation. Business books are not my thing. And I was really engrossed in your book. It's really good. I'm like, all right, cool. What's the bad news? She's like, well, you have about 37,000 words in your book, and you've got about 40,000 grammatical and punctuation errors. So I'm going to have to up my rate from 2 cents a word to 3 cents a word, because I don't know how you made it out of grade school, much less high school. I'm like, all right, I can live with that. I went to LA Unified School District. Like, I know my education was poor. Like, you don't have to rub it in, just charge me double. And she's like, all right, cool, we're friends again. But for you, like, do you have any formal training? Were you a prolific writer in high school or college, or did you take some writing classes?
No, none of that. I mean, like I said, I dabbled, and that was it. Never went anywhere. I do use Grammarly. Okay. But I won't use it while I'm writing. I use it when I'm done writing and doing my self edits.
Got it.
Because I find it too distracting when it pops up with a mistake.
Yeah, agree.
I lose my flow.
Because what I'm worried about writing a nonfiction book is the dialogue, like the descriptive stuff, getting the story out, maybe from like a third person perspective. I'm like, all right, I'm pretty creative. I've watched a ton of movies, like way too many, and I've read a ton of books. Like, if I wanted to write something post-apocalyptic, I feel like I could set the scene, but I feel like my dialogue would be so horrible. It'd be like, and then he said, and then she said, and then he said, and then she said. It's like, but I don't get that from your book. And trust me, I've read some books that are self-published where like halfway through I have to put it down because I'm like, oh God, this dialogue sucks. Like nobody's stepping on each other's words, nobody's interrupting each other. This is not how human beings talk. And so all right, now maybe I'm putting doubt in your mind. I don't know. How did you get over that dialogue fear of like, I want to write some gripping dialogue, but I have no formal training as a screenwriter or anything?
I have a friend. He's a writer. You might know him, Franklin Horton. Fantastic guy. And he had a degree in English literature, if I remember right. And he said that was probably one of the worst degrees ever for trying to be a writer. The only time it ever got him a job was when he was working at a photo shop. And that's because the manager felt bad for him. But I have no formal training in writing. And in doing revisions in book 1, after I'd gotten done writing it, I realized it was the same thing. I couldn't read my own manuscript because there was so much of the he said, she said. It was so regimented and structured, and that is not how people talk. I have thought about going back and fixing it, because there's still some of that in book 1, and I've thought about going back and fixing it, but I refuse to, because if you make it through book 1 and you make it to book 7, you can see that I have grown as an author and as a writer, and to me that's kind of a personal point of pride for me. But just remembering that, don't write it like you would write an essay. Write it like people would talk,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I notice in the dialogue in the first couple books, which I don't think enough people who write in this genre really flesh out, is you've got the one character, and right now his name escapes me because I've listened to all your books on Audible. I bought this just so I could show people. So I now am the proud owner of 2 different versions of the ranch. who's like the wise old sage who has some military experience, who's talking them through what they're feeling for having to take a human life. You know, everybody thinks the zombie apocalypse is going to come and all of a sudden they're going to be Rambo and there's going to be no PTSD and this is just the way it is. And I find that you write a lot of good stuff about the people exploring their own thoughts or fears or whatnot of like having to take a life, right? Like this is the first time I've had to take somebody's life. This is a pretty horrific situation. I like the fact that Jason's like, whatever, man, it just is what it is. Like I almost feel like Jason is like, you know, he's probably in his 30s or 40s when the book kicks off. He's never been married, which means he's probably somewhere on the spectrum. He's like, this is just where we are, right? Yeah. But the other characters have some really good dialogue around it, and that's the part that I didn't feel was like forced or corny or like formulaic. He said, and then she said, and then I comforted her this way. It's like it's good dialogue. So, are you a religious man or a spiritual man, or have you talked to people about this experience of being in the military and having to take a life? Because I get the feeling that this is not your first rodeo talking about this kind of stuff.
As far as religion goes, I'm more of a spiritual kind of guy. You know, I don't adhere to any church or anything like that. But you know, and I keep a lot of that really, really close to myself. But you know, you see a lot of human emotions when you're down on the floor of somebody's living room doing CPR on grandma. And I mean, you see the emotions from the family around you. And it's easy to bring those emotions into the raw emotions into a writing form. You know, as far as dealing with any sort of PTSD. And I think probably the best I've ever seen as far as PTSD portrayal in a movie was like Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games, and how she deals with the PTSD afterwards. And you people are people. I mean, that you know, taking a life is not something you want to have to do. And
right.
You know, if you're going to be a gun owner, you better be prepared, because that could be an eventuality.
Right.
You know, and I do have, you know, lots of military friends, and I've talked to them about how, because while they may not have taken a life, they have been around people that have, and, you know, being able to talk about that and just like in a one-on-one. So I've been able to draw on those experiences too, on their experiences.
Do you listen? You mentioned that your level of reading has gone down substantially since you've become an author. Do you find yourself gravitating to, you know, military podcasts or you know, TV shows or something around this to like get ideas? Or are you listening to, you know, Andy Stumpf or Jack Carr or any of these guys who are, you know, ex tip of the spear military guys that are a lot of times opening up and talking about their experience? I know he's not a friend, he's an acquaintance, a gentleman that runs a very successful company, and he's an ex you know, Ranger, Green Beret, CIA, the whole 9 yards. A couple of his podcasts are like, this is really just a therapy session for you and a soldier friend who needs to get this stuff out there. You just happen to do it on podcast form. So do you find yourself consuming different kind of stuff to inform your writing?
Believe it or not, no. About the only podcast that we listen to regularly is True Crime.
Yeah. Great podcast, by the way.
Yeah. It's just a, you know, it's a escape from everything else. And it's like, wow, you know, people are nuts.
We're gonna have to get a clip of that. Wow, people, here's somebody that writes about post-apocalyptic stuff going crazy, and you're like, oh, you want to hear some real crazy shit? Just listen to the True Crimes podcast.
Yeah. People are nuts, man.
That's great. And then, you know, I won't ask you any numbers or whatnot, but I know personally, you know, when you self-publish a book and I sell it on Amazon, you know, they take their 40% royalty fee, and then they take like their $4 for printing the book. And, you know, when it's all said and done, a $15 book, I end up with $6 or something. Is are the financials better once you get a publisher, or is it just the fact that they can help you sell more books? Like, why go the publisher route instead of just continuing to self-publish, since you obviously did build an audience with that first couple books?
The biggest advantage that I have found to having a publisher, especially one that I have such a close working relationship with, is that he realizes he doesn't get paid unless I get paid. And
right.
The better I do, the better he does. and he always puts me first, and I mean, he's got other authors on his payroll, or if that's what you want to call it, but
Right.
he always makes me feel like I'm number one in his books. And he handles relentlessly the advertising, getting the audiobooks done. He deals with all of that stuff, and that's stuff that I never wanted to deal with in the first place. I just wanted to write books.
Yeah.
And so that's the biggest advantage to having Dan. And it's pretty much, our agreement is, do what you got to do, Dan. Let me know if there's anything drastic, and we'll go from there.
I'm looking up, I couldn't remember off the top of my head, so I'm looking it up right now. Who's the narrator on your audiobooks?
The first, 4 books are Christopher Lane.
Okay.
And then we brought in Aaron Moon to do books 5 and 6, because that is from a female's perspective, female main character. So
love it. Yeah, because I have found that the narrator of an audiobook will make or break it really fast. Like, I've listened to audiobooks simply because Ray Porter is the narrator, and I feel like him and the guy that played Balky on Perfect Strangers, that 80s TV show, he's
Bronson
Pinocchi or something like that. He's like a prolific audiobook reader. I will listen to any book, any genre, where either he or Ray Porter are the narrator, because there's some books that I've really wanted to listen to, and I just didn't have the time to sit down and read the physical copy. And a chapter in, I'm like hitting the return button on Audible. I'm like, there's no way I can listen to this person for 11 hours. So how did you find Christopher Lane? Because I wasn't really familiar with him until I got your book, and he's great.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Dan actually worked for Dan.
Okay.
Does some of the other audiobooks for the company. And he's the one that I picked, because I got to listen to a couple different clips of different people reading it, and it was like, Chris, yeah, I want this guy. And you were talking about a bad narrator can ruin a book, and we had a problem with book 4, because it was a 2020, doing the whole COVID thing, and we could not get Chris Lane back. I mean, he had it wasn't going to happen. So we went with a different narrator, and George is a fantastic guy, phenomenal reader, but there was a big backlash because we changed narrators mid-stride. And fortunately, after the whole 2020 deal went away, Chris was able to come back, and he redid book 4 for us, and it smoothed things over.
Yeah, so that's the voice now. When I bought book 4 just the other day, because I just went ahead and bought all 7 of them, I know I'm going to get through all of them. So dinner's on me tonight. So you were able to go back, and now the Audible version is Christopher Lane, because he's great. Yes. Okay, yeah. Cool.
And I mean, no disrespect towards George. I mean, the guy is phenomenal. He's done so many good things as far as voice reading goes. And I think,
but people just get used to a voice.
Exactly. And that's the number one golden rule is don't change narrators midstream.
Right.
And it was something that was out of our control.
Yeah.
But we fixed it, and we're lucky to have Chris back. And as far as Aaron doing the voice of Tara in books 5 and 6, fantastic. I mean, her voice, the way she voiced Tara, was the voice that was in my head when I was writing.
Amazing.
And I mean, she nailed it.
And for you, again, I think we'll circle back all the way around to this question of the biggest realization pain in the ass on your ranch personally has been the tires. What was the big realization of writing for the characters in Jason and the Jack Sterling legacy? What was the biggest aha of ooh, when I started to do some research, I didn't realize I was going to have to flush this out, or I didn't realize I was going to have to go down this path to make this story make sense? What's been the biggest aha in the world that you've created?
The biggest one was I would have to say fuel.
Yeah.
I mean, they run a lot of vehicles, and fuel's a finite resource now. And so it was like, okay, now how can I get around this?
Right.
How can I fix this?
How can I tell a story where we end up with gas in every book?
Yeah. And you'll see it when you get into the later books, like 5 and 6, where you rely on horseback more often. We rely on our feet.
Yeah. Just one time in one post-apocalyptic movie, and people that aren't into the pew-pews, they're not into firearms, they won't understand what the hell I'm talking about. I have a lot of firearms because I love shooting. I love collecting them. It is an epic pain in the ass to keep track of calibers and magazines. And, the magazine for a SIG 365 XL doesn't fit the magazine well for a SIG 365 macro, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just one time in one post-apocalyptic movie, I want to see somebody jam home a magazine and it just falls out because it's the wrong magazine. Because pairing magazines to, I think that's why the main character on The Walking Dead just had a revolver for the entire scope of the show. Because magazines are a pain in the ass.
Yes. Did you know that you can fit a 380 round in a 9mm and it will shoot? It won't reload, but it will shoot.
No, I did not know this. This is good.
I found that out by accident.
Yeah. There's some things you can find out with different calibers by accident that will have me calling the fire department, unfortunately. So,
I was like, why is this thing not cycling right?
Yeah, I want to see a misfire one time where somebody tries to shoot like a 12 gauge out of a 10 gauge or vice versa, and the end of the barrel just blows up or something goes bad, because the firearms always seem to work perfectly in post-apocalyptic novels, and I'm like, that's not how it would work. You would be going to your knife way sooner than you think.
Just throwing the gun at him be more effective.
Totally. So what did I know you haven't done a ton of these interviews, but what did I forget to ask, or what's the question that you're like, man, I wish you would have asked me coming into this podcast, or something that you've learned through this process of now becoming, writing for a living? What's the stuff I'm forgetting to ask you?
I don't know. I do want to throw out there that I do hang out on a couple of aspiring writers groups on Facebook, and I see people suffering from the imposter syndrome so bad that, and they just keep going back through their work, and they keep coming back through it, and they won't publish it because it's not perfect. And they want it to be perfect because they want to be the next Stephen King or the next Tom Clancy, or just send it, tell your story and send it. Don't doubt yourself. Don't let people tell you that the genre has been written a million times. There's a million EMP stories out there. There's a million werewolf stories out there. Whatever it is, they're out there. Put your spin on it and send it. Make it your own. And don't doubt yourself. Just do it.
I love it. Now you're queuing up a bunch of new questions in my mind. Those first couple books, before you had a publisher with creative text who's like, all right, we'll do the Facebook ads, we'll get the press releases out there, etc. How did you market your book? Like, when you had that moment when you went from 10 readers to 25 readers and 25 to 100 and 100 to 1,000, Chris, did you ever find out how many reviews we've got on the different Sterling Legacy books?
There's like 2,500 on each book. 2,500
in each book. And in my experience, only about a fifth or a 10th or a 20th of readers will take the time to leave a review. So you've got, tens of thousands of books out there in circulation with each book, and probably growing with each one. And then people like me are going to discover your book and buy all 7 at the same time. So how were you promoting your book in those early days before you got a big boy publisher behind you?
The honest truth is that I wasn't. I mean, I would do the free weekend once in a while, and that helped. I mean, that was a big help, because how many people will just snag up a free book?
Right.
Think, I may never read it, but I've got it. And that does help boost your sales, so to speak. And it does boost you up in the ratings, and the higher you are in the ratings, the better your free advertising is, and that was about all I would do. I wasn't into the advertising. I just didn't want to deal with any of it. I just wanted to write. And, like I said, Dan has taken over all that and run with it like mad.
That's amazing, man. Congratulations. Like, what a great success story.
It's a Cinderella story. I mean, if we're being honest, that's what it is.
Has it made retirement much easier? You can buy new toys now that you got a source of income you weren't planning on?
Yeah. Life is good. I mean, it's not a concern anymore.
What's something you and your wife treated yourself to now that you've got the newfound, I won't say wealth, because nobody gets wealthy writing anymore, but the newfound stream of income from being a writer? What's something you and your wife treated yourself to?
Well, we've got the quads, and those are something that you use a lot in the summertime. We get a lot of miles put on those. But it's just being able to, like, if we want to go up and see the granddaughter, and my daughter's family, it's we can go.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to wait, and we don't have to, just nitpick where we spend our money.
Yeah, makes retirement a little bit easier, huh?
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. 2 questions that I always love to finish the podcast on, and then just in case I forgot to tell you an email when we were corresponding, thank you for being on. Like, this is a real treat for me, because like it's sometimes very hard to even find an email for an author who I enjoy, and you were quick to respond, and we got this locked in like 2 weeks. So first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for being on. I appreciate it, and I hope this helps.
Having me.
Yeah, I hope this helps a lot of new people find your book. The first one is called The Ranch by Sean Liscom, and it's book 1 of the Jack Sterling legacy. Last 2 questions, and you can ruminate on them or answer as quickly as you want. One is, this is coming out in 2023. What are you most looking forward to in the rest of the year, or what's your biggest hope for this book, especially the new series that you have coming out? And then your favorite movie and why. And since you're an author, I feel like I have to ask you what's your favorite book and why. So anywhere you want to go with that, like stuff you're looking forward to for yourself personally, or where this book series goes, and then favorite movie and favorite book and why.
As far as favorite book goes, I would have to go back to the one that got me started in this genre, and that's the Lights Out book. I've read it over and over again, and it's older book, but it's still a good book. As far as like a movie goes, I think probably my favorite movie would be Serenity, based off the Firefly series.
Oh, that's a great movie.
Yeah,
great science fiction.
Movie. And I love that movie.
So wait, are you going to write science fiction anytime?
I might. That's one of the things I've dabbled in the past. So we'll see where it goes.
Perfect.
As far as plans for 2023, just going to continue enjoying life, spend time with my wife and my daughters and granddaughter, and just not stress about anything.
And how does Dan get the Jack Sterling legacy optioned for like an Amazon TV show? Like what work is he doing there to make sure we bring this to the screen at some point?
I know that to get something on the big screen or even the little screen is rare. But I know Dan does have a few contacts, and he does hit him up every once in a while. So you never know. It may happen. It may not.
Yeah.
I think every author would love to see their stuff on the big screen, but we'd also be horrified to see our stuff on the big screen.
Right. Terrifying, right? It's like, what happened here?
Yeah. So,
that's amazing, man. Well,
I wouldn't say no.
Again, I really appreciate you being on. It means a lot. And then maybe when you come out of by the way, the new series, do you have a book title yet or a working title?
It's going to be, it'll be the Feral series.
The Feral series. All right. Well, when that gets ready to launch, or maybe on launch day, somewhere around there, we can have you back on, and we'll do this as a live stream so that we can get people to buy the book that first week that it's out, because I know that really helps the Amazon rankings and the organic ad traffic and stuff. But man, it's been a real pleasure. I appreciate your honesty and just your openness to share, because it's a great book, and I've got, I got through your first 2 books real fast, so my wife might not want me to read number 3 through 7 as quickly as I got through 1 and 2, but I'll get through the rest of these, and then we'll have a follow-up spoiler conversation about where the entire series goes.
You bet, man. Anytime. I can't believe I'm here having this conversation with you, and I so appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. I really appreciate you, man.